Welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports. We're back for recapping Week 3's action across the league. And there's so many things to get into, but before we start, please like and subscribe to the channel to get all your latest content. And we have started a TikTok and Instagram page as well. The link descriptions are in the bio. To start off, we're going to talk about the Buffalo Bills heading down to Miami to take on the Dolphins. And this was a real test to see how legitimate these Dolphins were with these new acquisitions they made in the offseason. And they really stood tall despite a lot of adversity they faced throughout this game. The Bills jumped out to start off this game with an opening drive touchdown. Josh Allen looked really sharp to start off in the first half, but in the second quarter he fumbled the ball, and this led to Miami's first touchdown to tie up the game at 7 apiece. And despite the Bills being able to score a touchdown of their own later in the second quarter, the Dolphins were able to come right back and tie things up before halftime. So despite not playing their best ball, their defense was able to make some stands when needed and held a highly potent Bills offense in check for most of this game. And the second half, the Bills offense only provided 3 points. Some of it was due to red zone miscues and missed field goals for sure, but I have to give credit when credit is due to Miami's defense. They forced Josh Allen to some errant throws. They didn't make him feel really comfortable in the pocket, and they really shut down the Bills' rushing attack. Again, their offense is a little bit too Josh Allen-centric per se, where he's dropping back to pass on too many occasions rather than just trying to hand off the ball and establish a running game. And if you take out a Zach Moss 40-yard gain, most of their rushing numbers were pretty pedestrian actually, and that's just not going to get the job done. I mean, they have Devin Singletary, they do have Zach Moss, who are pretty solid backs, and they have really good offensive line play as well, but they're just not figuring out that balance between rush and passing options. And these are going to really come back to bite them later on the season if they don't get this fixed. They're going to really lean on that offense given their woes in the secondary now, with the recent injuries to Micah Hyde now being placed on IR with the neck injury, and with Tre'Davious White still on the mend on the PUP list. They're gonna really, like I said, be leading on that offense for sure. And I still need to see more from Miami. I mean, this is a great win, but September wins don't have as much weight compared to wins in November, December, and January, obviously leading into hopefully February. So this is a great start for the Miami Dolphins. I mean, they have another tough test with the defending AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals next Thursday, but I'm still kind of timid to really put in a lot of stock. I'm impressed, don't get me wrong, but I still need to see more and a larger sample size to really buy in. I still have more faith in the Bills to claim this division title and even the top overall seed in the conference, given that they're so talented. But they do need to clean up some things, and I think this is a nice thing to have this happen sooner than later, and they can work on this in the future when they have that rematch in Buffalo later this season. On Thursday Night Football, we saw the Steelers travel to Cleveland to play the Browns, and it was kind of a boring game, not gonna lie, for a Thursday night matchup. Mitchell Trubisky led a kind of a lackluster performance on the offensive side of things with pedestrian numbers across the board. If it wasn't thanks to his receivers helping him out, this offense just lacks juice, it lacks a spark, and I really think they need to change who's leading this offense to rookie Kenny Pickett. We know what we've seen and we know what we can get from Mitchell Trubisky. He's a decent quarterback that likes to get out on the edges and roll out and work on a bootleg for sure, but he just doesn't have the ability to lead an offense into a highly potent offense. It's not to say that he doesn't have weapons either. This isn't Mitchell Trubisky in Chicago. And I know Mike Tomlin is an old-fashioned coach and he's going to be very timid to change QBs mid-season, but it's time to see what this rookie is made of and just get some reps. I don't really think this season that they were going to really make a deep run into the playoffs, let alone a wild card berth, given that they're in a really tough division with the Browns, the Bengals, and the Ravens, and then let alone the entire conference. So I think that this is a rebuilding year for the Steelers. It's hard to say. And I think that it's time to hand over the reins to Kenny Pickett. For the Browns side of things, they look really good defensively. They responded well after a tough loss to the Jets, that they really had that game in hand and blew a late lead to Joe Flacco and the Jets. But this time around, they didn't really play with their food. They stomped on the neck of the Steelers and were able to really get ahead of the game and provide enough of a cushion to sustain a late rally by the Steelers towards the end. But they played a really smart game. Jacoby Brissett played conservatively but made all the plays to win the game rather than lose the game. And I really have to think now with this season with the Browns, given that this is kind of an 11-game audition for whoever is going to take over the offense in these 11 games to get another starting gig. And if Jacoby Brissett is somewhat successful and leads the Browns to, let's say, a 7-4 record after 11 games, I think he has a chance to get a starting gig somewhere else. Baker was only a little bit more patient, and he was able to show that he can do a lot with this offense as well. I only think that his situation in Cleveland for this year would set him up for better long-term success rather than being kind of hasty and going into a questionable situation down in Carolina with lesser talent, lesser structure compared to what is in Cleveland. I think heading into the offseason with these two QBs looking at another job, I think the offseason outlook is looking better for Jacoby Brissett. The Philadelphia Eagles traveled to Washington to play the Commanders, and I was really impressed with their performance, especially in the second quarter. They used a 24-point burst in that second quarter alone to really put this game on ice. Their defense swarmed their former quarterback Carson Wentz with 5 sacks in the first quarter, 7 in the first half, and 9 total for the game overall. We saw 6 different Eagles apply sacks on Carson Wentz. Now we know that the Commanders' offensive line has been suspect this year to say the least, but Carson is still has some talent in there and he has some good weapons on the outside, but he never had time to get the ball out to his receivers at all. He had a very pedestrian passing game and a lot of yards and stats that he was able to pad up when the game was virtually over. The Eagles offense really got off to a strong start in that second quarter after a scoreless first quarter with a 24-point burst. I was very impressed with Jalen Hurts showcasing his arm this time rather than his legs against Minnesota last week. He had long passes to Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown as well, even rookie Grant Calcaterra in the third quarter. And like I said, they used this second quarter burst to really put distance against their division rivals. And this offense just looks so scary. I mean, if the rushing attack isn't that great that day, they can just pass the ball to A.J. Brown. And if you decide to double team A.J. Brown, I want Devontae Smith really taking advantage of your cornerback too. And then if not that, then you have Dallas Goddard, who's arguably a Pro Bowl tight end. He had his first touchdown of the season. Didn't have a lot of receiving yards coming off a minor ankle injury during the middle of the game, but he got into the end zone, so I was very impressed with how he was able to perform. Quez Watkins is the burner deep for sure, and he had a long touchdown against the Vikings last week. Had a quiet game, but there's only so many people that you can pay attention to as a defense, and this is a Washington secondary that was maligned in this game. They were without their starting cornerback heading into this game, so having players that usually play special teams come in and guard guys like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith is a tall task to ask. And Devontae Smith, after having a catchless game in the season opener against Detroit, he's responded very well. In this game alone, he had 169 yards off of 8 catches and a touchdown, which it was his first of the season. And he is now showing that he can run the deeper routes as well. We saw bits and pieces of that in his rookie year, but now with consistent coverage, now maybe more one-on-one matchup, he went up for also contested balls as well. And I know he can get separation given his really good route running abilities, but the fact that now he can high point balls and you can throw back shoulder fades to him as well is going to be pretty scary to guard. And if this offense continues at the pace it's going, complemented by strong defensive play, I think they're going to be big time NFC favorites in this 2022 season. The Colts had a big upset win against the Kansas City Chiefs, which was a much needed win after starting off the first 2 weeks winless and getting really throttled down in Jacksonville, we saw in week 2. Matt Ryan had a better game, still not a great game, but it was enough to win. He endured a lot of sacks, which is strange considering that the offensive line for the Indianapolis Colts is very strong. But when you have to block guys like Chris Jones on the other side, it's no easy feat. The Kansas City Chiefs kind of gave this game away for sure. They had several miscues in plus territory where they missed a field goal. They went for a fake field goal as well. They just left points on the board, and with Travis Kelce now taking over as the true number one option in this Chiefs offense, guys like Sky Moore, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Mecole Hardman are going to have to step up to make up for that lack of production with the loss of Tyreek Hill in this offseason. The running game wasn't really a factor in this game as well, and Mahomes has to be really smart with the ball. Some of his passes were a little bit too careless and reckless for my liking. I know that he's a talented quarterback and he can make all the throws, but sometimes he just really has to take what the defense is giving him, and this is a learning curve. I mean, thankfully the other teams in the AFC West did drop games as well, so their only real competition at this point in time are the Denver Broncos, but they're going to take some time this season to really get adjusted into this new look Chiefs offense. The Tennessee Titans hosted the Vegas Raiders on Sunday, and this is a clash between two 0-2 teams with disappointing starts to their year despite making the playoffs in the 2021 season. And I was really shocked to see how the Raiders kind of struggled out of the gate. They just are too talented on the outside with Devontae Adams, and he only had 5 catches for 36 yards. He had a touchdown, which is nice, but I definitely need to see more yardage production, and Mac Hollins definitely stepped up and took advantage of some matchups. But they need guys also like Darren Waller to really step up as well. Ryan Tannehill had a decent game responding after a really tough outing against the Bills on Monday night. And Derrick Henry also responded with his first touchdown of the year as well. And this was a really much needed win for the Titans after starting off 0-2. And now with the Raiders starting off the season 0-3, I just think that now their postseason hopes are already dashed in a really competitive division. The AFC as a whole is also way too competitive, and I think a 3-game hole is just too much to overcome. So they're going to need to make some adjustments, but I don't see them really having too much of a successful season given this tough start. We saw Minnesota play the Detroit Lions on Sunday, and this is a really fun game to watch. The Lions are building off some momentum after a win against the Commanders last week, and they started off the game with a 14-0 run. Amon-Ra St. Brown really had another nice game with 73 yards receiving, and this offense really seems to be flowing now through him. They still opened up some things out for TJ Hawkinson, who's had a quiet start to the season but got into the end zone for the first time this year. And Jared Goff seems to be comfortable in year 2 with the Detroit Lions. So a good start, but they didn't finish, unfortunately, because the Minnesota Vikings got some stops when needed. They took advantage and used their running attack with Dalvin Cook and Madison as well, and they both had rushing touchdowns in the second half to make this game more competitive. Despite Detroit coming back out in the second half and taking another 10-point lead, 2 touchdowns, one from Madison and KJ Osborne to take the lead late in the fourth quarter, proved to be the difference in the game. On the Minnesota side of things, they're definitely looking a lot better compared to their week 2 loss to the Eagles, but Justin Jefferson is really starting to concern me after 2 weeks of very lackluster production, only 62 yards combined over the course of 2 weeks. I look for Kirk Cousins to really get him going in week 4 to get him back into the offense. The Ravens and New England Patriots played in Foxborough Sunday afternoon, and Lamar really showcased what his abilities are through the air and the ground. He now leads the league in total touchdowns and passing touchdowns, especially with 4 on Sunday with another one on the ground, and I think this is the time that the Ravens should really try to attempt to pay him now. I know talks of a potential extension will be shut down once the season's commenced, but the Ravens are only going to be ending up paying more and more, and I think they'll be kicking themselves for not taking that deal earlier with for whatever it was, 200 million or so. Because the way Lamar is playing right now, I mean, he's playing like an MVP again. If he ends up leading Baltimore to another division title, potentially deep playoff run again, another MVP, I mean, he's possibly going to be a $300 million quarterback. He's just that good. Lamar is clearly not the prototypical drop back passer quarterback, but what he does is successful. It's the perfect dual threat quarterback in this modern era. Still doing it with not the best of weapons in terms of receivers, but really maximizing guys like Mark Andrews from the tight end spot. Once they get a more balanced rushing attack, J.K. Dobbins coming back into the fold, it'll be really dangerous to see what Baltimore can do moving forward. Now, transitioning to the late afternoon games, we saw the Green Bay Packers head down to Tampa to play Tom Brady and the Bucs. And now Tom Brady is not really having a good start to the season. Now we can say that his receiving corps is definitely maligned due to suspensions and injuries. Julio Jones has missed 2 games. Mike Evans, his true number 1 receiver, is out this game. Gronk retired in the offseason as well. So he was playing around with guys like Cole Beasley, Russell Gage for names. And we saw that there was a real lack of chemistry out there on the outside. Tom really struggled to get the ball out to his receivers, and their defense really limited the Packers' offense to 14 points and 0 in the second half. There was a chance for the Packers to really blow this game open towards the end of the first half, where we saw Rodgers hit Aaron Jones for a short pass, and he was streaking towards the end zone, but taking a big hit from behind by defensive tackle Vita Vea, jarred the ball loose and was recovered in the end zone by the Buccaneers defense. So a red zone turnover right there, where it could have been at least 3 points, if not a touchdown, really changed the complexion of this ball game. Tom Brady was able to lead the Bucs back into this game and cut the deficit to 2 points before the end of the fourth quarter. But to force overtime, they needed a 2-point conversion. And as a quarterback, you need to have an idea where the game clock is. It is his home stadium, so the first thing that quarterbacks always do is figure out where is the game clock in our stadium, so I know how much time is left before I need to call a play. And he just lost track of time, and that backed him up 5 yards, so they had to call the play from the 7 rather than the 2. He put up a decent pass, but it was deflected by linebacker Devondre Campbell, and that was it for them, and the Packers were able to hold on for the victory. And this is now their first loss of the year for the Bucs. With Mike Evans coming back, of course, they're going to have some boost in their receiving corps, but I'm going to be concerned how Brady's going to be able to really get this offense going after a couple tough weeks with the Saints and now the Green Bay Packers. Heading out to LA, the Jaguars won 38-10, and they really pounced all over the Chargers. Quarterback Justin Herbert showed signs that he really shouldn't have been playing in this game. I appreciate the effort and him wanting to send a message that he's able to get out performances, but it's up to Coach Brandon Staley to really save the quarterback from himself and protect him from further injury. I mean, I saw him get hit a couple times and he was wincing in pain. I mean, rib injuries are no joke, and I understand that you can have pain-killing injections which may help, but they can lead to more damage if he's not really feeling anything in there. So he had a sloppy game, he had an interception and a fumble lost. And I think now with the Chargers traveling to Houston next week, I think this is a chance to rest Justin Herbert. Even if they were to lose, they just need to have the health of their quarterback right now. And they did lose Rashawn Slater, their starting left tackle, to a biceps tear. And he's unfortunately done for the year. So with their now somewhat compensated offensive line, I don't know if I want to risk my already injured quarterback for a game that maybe that you have enough talent to really go out there and win. But it's a rough start for the Chargers this year. I mean, they had injuries now to J.C. Jackson entering the year, and they also lost Keenan Allen to a hamstring injury for a couple of games. So now with Justin Herbert and Rashawn Slater out for a decent amount of time for the latter, I would be concerned about how the Chargers are going to make adjustments to a competitive conference, and being down 1-2 already, and also not having the tiebreaker to the Chiefs is going to be a scary thing. Jacksonville Jaguars as well. They had a really strong start to this year. Really had a chance to be even 3-0 if they didn't drop the season opener to the Commanders, where they were in that game, to say the least. But Trevor Lawrence has come out this game with the best performance of his young career. James Robinson seems to be back to his 1,000-yard season self after a season-ending Achilles tear last year. They're going to be traveling up to Philadelphia for a reunion for Doug Peterson against the team that he won a Super Bowl with back in 2017. As an Eagles fan, I'm definitely concerned about how this Jaguar team is going to come in. They have not a lot to lose, and I think given that he knows a lot of this roster as well, Jacksonville's going to make things tough for Philly, that's for sure. And to close Sunday's action, we had the San Francisco 49ers and the Denver Broncos. The Denver offense still looked very lackluster. This is now an offensive output of 9 points. They struggled last week against the Houston Texans, barely winning that game, and also winning at Seattle to start off their season is really a concern. I mean, there's way too much talent here, and it seems that Coach Nathaniel Hackett is kind of overwhelmed with how to really utilize Russell Wilson and his skill set and utilize the talent on the outside as well. They had a lot of punts in the first half. They only had a field goal, and thankfully their defense was able to keep them in this game. Despite giving up an opening drive touchdown, their defense really clamped down after that, only surrendering 3 more points throughout the rest of the ball game. A couple key turnovers in the fourth really turned the tide for the Denver Broncos as well. One of them was a pick off Jimmy Garoppolo, who tried to squeeze a ball in there to tight coverage, but intercepted by a Broncos linebacker. And a kind of a mental gaffe. We saw Jimmy Garoppolo drop back to pass and just simply step on the back line to give up a safety, giving the Broncos 2 points and cutting that deficit from 7-3 to 7-5 at that moment in time. In the fourth quarter, the offense for the Denver Broncos kind of woke up, and they were able to engineer a go-ahead touchdown drive capped off by Melvin Gordon, taking it in for a touchdown from 2 yards out. And their defense was able to hold on to the victory, forcing a late fumble on running back Jeff Wilson. And that was able to now lead them to a 2-and-run record after 3 games, in a record they probably don't deserve against some questionable competition also, but wins are wins, and right now they're tied atop the division lead with the Kansas City Chiefs, and they're going to need to clean up some things, but with a quarterback like Russell Wilson, anything is really possible. This is still one of the more talented teams on the offensive side of the ball, and their defense can hold up their end of the bargain too. As a Broncos fan, I am definitely concerned about the offensive output. Given where we stand, I think that you'd be really happy about where you are. So the Monday night game was a clash of 2 NFC East rivals, the New York Giants hosting the Dallas Cowboys, and this is Cooper Rush's second start of the season, replacing the injured Dak Prescott coming off a thumb injury to his throwing hand on opening night. And he played pretty well, didn't make any big mistakes. He threw a couple really good passes. One was dropped by CeeDee Lamb towards the end of the first half, but later CeeDee was able to redeem himself. The early part of that game really showed signs of a defensive slugfest, with each team settling for field goals rather than touchdowns. The Giants had issues on offense getting the passing game going. Daniel Jones had a kind of a pedestrian game through the air, really had a nice day on the ground, but Saquon Barkley was really the lone bright spot of the Giants offense, having a nice little burst to take a 13-6 lead midway through the third quarter. And he seems to be really hitting his stride after a couple injury-plagued seasons. I'm really happy to see him having that burst, that strength to really hit the hole as well, and him really finishing off these runs and getting into the end zone. So if this continues to be the Saquon Barkley that we know to come and love, I think the Giants' running game will definitely be dangerous. It's just a matter of whether they can get the quarterback play to be consistent. Towards the second half, though, this is when the Dallas offense really started to wake up. Tony Pollard had 103 rushing yards on the day, and this was complemented by Zeke providing 73 rushing yards of his own and a touchdown to tie up the game at 13 apiece. And this tandem of backs who we see now, this slow exchange from Zeke being the bell cow back, with Tony Pollard being more involved in the offense from a pass catching standpoint and now a running game standpoint, to me that they're really trying to switch gears to focusing on Tony Pollard more and slowly trying to weed out Zeke, or maybe even at least try to keep him fresh for a later postseason run. He plays a very physical brand of football where Tony Pollard's a little bit more finesse, and his ability to have that shaky quickness out of the backfield allows him to sustain fewer hits. Whether Zeke is on the other side, he's going to be inflicting a lot of punishment, but he also sustains a lot as well, where he had issues with his knees and fitness issues with his weight in the past. He does seem a lot better shape coming into this season, but of course, given the more responsibility that he has, making sure that the offense doesn't totally sputter out of control now with Cooper Rush at the helm, it provides a big responsibility at Zeke Elliott's hands, and we'll see how he continues to play this season, but this was definitely his best game so far. Towards the end of the fourth quarter, this is when Dallas really distanced themselves. When the game was tied 13 apiece, they scored another touchdown off a nice one-handed grab by CeeDee Lamb that really iced the game and put the game, wouldn't say out of reach, but at least broke the tie. And with Lamb's one-handed catch, just really redeemed that terrible drop that he had in the first half. And after that, the Dallas defense really clamped down on a couple of Giants drives. They only gave up another 3 points to cut the deficit from 23-13 to 23-16, which was the game's final score. And the game was sealed when Daniel Jones threw an interception to Trayvon Diggs. And he had a couple opportunities to make plays at the ball and missed just due to either bad timing or the ball just going through his hands. But he is a boomer bust cornerback, which is what we've come to see in his early career, where he will gamble. He's not afraid to gamble, and while he lives and dies by this boom and bust mentality, he will end up getting interceptions because he's such a ball hawking cornerback. But today he didn't give out a lot of receiving yards. He gave up a couple contested catches or slightly mistimed breaks on passes, but I was very impressed with his coverage skills today, and if he can continue to progress and maybe dial back a little bit on the aggressiveness, he can just play a cover corner kind of role. And now with Dallas taking a 2-1 record, this is trending in the right direction with reports of Dak Prescott potentially coming back into the offense with his stitches being removed after sustaining a thumb injury on opening night. We'll see what his progression is in terms of his rehab process, but I wouldn't really count on him rushing back until probably the middle part of October just to be safe. But it seems that Cooper Rush really has a grip on the offense and the team is rallying around him. The defense is playing very well. We didn't see Micah Parsons get to the quarterback tonight, but he made impacts in other ways through his pursuit and gave out a couple of nice hits on Daniel Jones. But the Cowboys defensive line as a whole provided 5 sacks on the night, and they are now leading the league in total sacks after 3 weeks. For my best offensive performance, I'm going to name Lamar Jackson for week 3. He just had 5 total touchdowns, 100 yards rushing, over 200 yards passing, and I just think he's just in such a groove right now with the offense and really working himself towards a nice contract extension. And congrats to Lamar. I mean, he's representing himself and took a chance on his abilities to play in this league and continue to produce in a very highly violent game. And credit to him that he's been able to put himself in this situation. So I really just hope that Baltimore pays him what he's due. For my defensive player of the week, I'm going to name Brandon Graham, coming up with 2.5 sacks and a forced fumble. I was very impressed with how he set the tone for the Eagles defensive line on Sunday. He really got into Carson's face and forced errant throws and made him uncomfortable, really speeding up that internal clock. And coming off an Achilles injury last year where he only played 2 games, I think that in his back end of his career towards his mid to late 30s, I think that's very impressive that he's gotten off to this start already. He has 3 sacks through 3 games and really providing that leadership that they missed last year on the defensive line. And for teams that impressed me in week 3, I'm going to start with Miami. Again, they came up with a win against a really impressive team with the Buffalo Bills. They were able to hold a highly potent offense in check for most of that game, despite losing the time of possession battle about 40-20, basically having the ball for less than half that time. The team that really impressed me on Sunday was the Miami Dolphins, scoring a win against their bitter rivals, the Buffalo Bills. With that disparity in time of possession being about double the amount of time in favor of the Bills, they really made most of the ball with the possession. They had short fields thanks to their defense, generating a turnover on Josh Allen in the red zone, and really turning in turnovers into quick points was a good job by the Miami offense. The defense really held that offense in check and forced several miscues, especially in the red zone areas where they really had their way with teams like the Rams and the Titans last week. But if they can continue this trend, I think the Dolphins are truly a team to be on the watch for, but I need to see a little bit more. Philadelphia proved themselves to be really in control of this division and maybe even the NFC through 3 weeks. Jalen Hurts really is showing what he can do both through the air and the ground, and their defense has really picked up after a disappointing week 1 performance where they allowed 35 points to Detroit. Coming up with performances only holding the Minnesota Vikings to 7 points, and now Washington to only 6 points, with 2 points coming off a safety. So the defense has really picked up and they're forcing turnovers. Last week we saw the secondary get in on 3 turnovers with interceptions, and this time we saw a strip sack from the defensive line, and also coming up with 9 total sacks of Carson Wentz. So they can beat you multiple ways and take advantage of mismatches through their defensive line or their back end and their secondary. And even so, their linebackers have been able to pick up the slack as well. We've seen Kaiser White really play sideline to sideline, and TJ Edwards really lead the charge with a lot of tackles from any part of the field and even chipping in on blitzes as well. Philly is a team to watch out for moving forward. And another team I really want to give flowers to is Jacksonville. Coach Doug Peterson has really taken Trevor Lawrence under his wing and provided him with a lot of insight, given that he used to play in the league and has won a championship as a head coach as well. I think this is going to be a really good match for these two moving forward. And the Jaguars franchise, who's been much maligned as of late after the Urban Meyer scandalous year that they had last season, now they're really building on Trevor Lawrence's potential and building pieces around him as well. And if they didn't struggle in that fourth quarter against the Washington Commanders on opening day, they easily could have been 3-0. But this thumping win against the Los Angeles Chargers really put me on notice there that they're really making some early season statements. So Jacksonville's really trending in the right direction. Teams that really didn't impress me this week were the Las Vegas Raiders. They continue to falter with late game execution. They get into holes and have to rally late. We saw this same thing week 1 against the Chargers. Last week they gave up a big lead to the Arizona Cardinals, and now they were down for most of this game against the Titans, but they managed to almost tie up the game. They just didn't execute on the 2-point conversion attempt. Given with all these weapons and this new coaching staff, I just don't think that they're going to be able to really make up this deficit being 0-3. And the Bills, coming off 2 great performances to start off a season, they were really humbled by the Miami Dolphins. I think given that, yes, they've been missing some players on the defensive side of the ball, but I just don't think that, with a highly potent offense led by Josh Allen, who's potentially an MVP candidate this year, just didn't come up with the smart plays in the red zone. They didn't execute where they needed to. They were missing field goals under 40 yards, and that just doesn't cut it. And I'm thankful that they made this mistakes earlier in the season, and maybe they can correct them and keep this train moving forward, because I think they have aspirations of going deep into the playoffs and arguably a Super Bowl run. So these are. And finally, I'm going to name the Kansas City Chiefs as another disappointing team in Week 3. They truly had some issues with late game execution. Patrick Mahomes, like I said, looked skittish in the pocket, really trying to force some throws where they didn't really need to be made. Their offense tried to get a little bit too cute with short yardage situations and even on plus side territory. I mean, a fake field goal when it's really not that necessary, and your defense is really holding this Colts offense in check. getting in the face of quarterback Matt Ryan, and also committing silly defensive penalties. I mean, we saw Chris Jones commit an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty that extended the Colts drive that led to the go-ahead score. And with those, type of disciplinary issues, there's gonna be some times where that's seriously gonna bite you back in the butt, and that happened in the postseason last year. They're not the same team as they used to be, obviously, with the loss of Tyreek Hill. And of course, they're in a very competitive division and a very competitive conference. And maybe they can get away with these types of behaviors against bad teams, but with the good teams and them being so bountiful in the AFC, they really had to clean up their act if they want to have a deep postseason run. And that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate everybody's participation and tuning into these videos. And moving forward, as always, please like and subscribe.